If we open an old 19th century textbook, what do we see? We will most certainly find pages teaching phonics, word lists, sentences, and short text. And when the reading technique is mastered, children will move from primers to readers. However, at the end of the 19th century, a new type of reader emerged, no longer comprising of short text, but instead written as full novel. I named this type of textbook scholastic novel. But why not use regular novels? Because the authors, many of whom were women, had a new idea. Instead of limiting the teaching to reading comprehension, they could fill these novels with all the other topics that were part of the national curriculum. So, they incorporated disciplines such as history, science, domestic economy, geography, hygiene, and most important of all, morality. All of it through a fictional story centered on children to whom many adventures happen. What does the existing research say about these scholastic novels? Even though hundreds of these textbooks were published, critics have largely focused on one single book, Le Tour de la France par deux enfants, a bestseller that sold over 8 million copies. These studies seem to suggest that all books were similar and crafted based on this text. Furthermore, the existing studies are mostly sociological or historical, but rarely have these textbooks been studied as literary text. One aspect of my literary analysis is to look at these books as literary objects, which means considering both the fiction inside and the text that surrounds it. This around text is called paratext, a term that was coined by Gérard Genette. Based on this theory, in this presentation, I will analyze the covers of some of these textbooks. What are the textbooks I am looking at? Of course, I analyze Le Tour de la France, but my corpus expands way beyond it. By choosing to focus on scholastic novels, I am putting together dozens of textbooks that have never been in conversation before. For this presentation, I will focus on 3 authors, including the famous G. Bruno. Even though Marie-Robert Alt and Clarisse Joranville were highly prolific and successful, they, contrary to G. Bruno, have been forgotten or ignored by literary critics. When we look at this book cover, the first observation we can make is that, based on its appearance, it is quite difficult to distinguish this book from regular children's books. By looking at the ratio of text to image, the font, the mention of school in the subtitles, we can see how these books are not following a pattern and instead can be distributed on a spectrum, from the most scholastic to the most entertaining. Secondly, we may also wonder, for whom were these books written? Were they for girls, for boys, or both? Keep in mind that public schools in France were mostly single-gendered and used separate textbooks until the 1960s, except in small villages because they could not afford to have 2 separate schools. Looking at this cover and its subtext, à l'usage des jeunes filles, to be used by young girls, we know that Suzette is only for girls. Now looking at these 2 images suggests that they are for boys, when in fact they were for both genders. But you would only know if you opened the book. Furthermore, not only were these books written with a certain gender in mind, but they were also targeting a specific social class. By looking at the clothing and setting displayed on the cover, we can identify the social and economic class it was intended for: working class, farmers in rural area, or bourgeoisie. All of this reveals the variety in scholastic novels and their intentions. It proves that they do not follow a pattern, but rather show great variety through their specific audience and content. In this presentation, I have only looked at the covers, but if we open these books and read them in detail, we see that, through the use of fiction, these authors had their own interpretation of the national curriculum and produced social and political discourses that were often subversive. It is time to finally spotlight these women authors whose work has been neglected. Merci.